Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another round of World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Don Arleth. The Balticconnector bi-directional gas pipeline connects Finland and Estonia underneath the Baltic Sea. Now, since Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this link has been a lifeline for Estonia not to have to rely on Russia for its supply of natural gas. In October of last year, the connector was damaged and taken offline. A Chinese container ship, the newnew Polar Bear, was found responsible. The ship's crew claimed that they inadvertently drugged the ship's anchor on the seafloor, ultimately rupturing the pipeline. This incident was, however, a wake-up call for both Finland and Estonia, and just today, the two countries signed a memorandum of understanding concerning the protection and repair of underwater energy infrastructure. And now, here to explore more on this subject, I'm now joined by a lecturer of international relations at the Baltic Defense College, Wierenga. Hello, Louis, and thanks for joining me today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
This is not one of these major breaking news issues, but it is something that we pay attention to, especially in light of Russian aggression and the potential that Russia can launch these hybrid attacks and damage critical infrastructure here in our region and amongst NATO countries. So this memorandum of understanding today was signed between Finland and Estonia. Although this is where it starts and this is kind of where it ends. So what do you think are the lessons that they took away from the incident which happened last October and took some time to resolve?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to walk back one step further. I think that they have taken a lot of lessons from regional intergovernmental organizations like the Council on Baltic Sea States and the Nordic Baltic 8, as well as the Nordic Council for, starting a dialogue. Of course, Finland and Estonia have had, close dialogue given, where they are on the map and other things that bring those two countries together. But of course, the threats that you highlight that they face and the potential for these hybrid threats becoming worse and worse, and at a time when geopolitical tensions are arguably also getting worse and worse, I think that this is the start of something that is bringing in other ministries, because this wasn't an MOD. The MOD, the MOI, and the MFA were, of course, assisting this, but the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, was actually signed between the Finnish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment and the Estonian Ministry of Climate. So it's bringing in several different ministries to make, it signals to the public and it signals to each other and also to allies, quite frankly, that this is an all of government, all of society issue, and that it's taking a high position everywhere.
Now, concerning this underwater energy infrastructure, so do you think that patrols will be increased along this, along where the Baltic Connector lies underneath the sea? How do you think that the two countries plan on protecting this infrastructure?
Well, I think that first and foremost, they're going to look at the existing monitoring and security measures that aim to protect underwater energy and infrastructure in their area, and look at how they can basically better do that. There are a couple of key challenges that the Baltic Sea region in general faces: conventional and unconventional threats, as well as economic dependence on Russia. And the economic dependence issue should be solved mostly, the energy dependence, by 2025. But I think that looking at the vulnerability of critical infrastructure in the region, especially looking at what the Russian Navy and the GUGI, the main directorate for deep sea research, is doing, that's going to, maritime is going to play a more and more, at least could play more and more of an important posture in the defense strategies of both countries, as well as countries in the wider area. We tend to think about land-centric defense, but if in a potential NATO conflict between NATO and Russia in the area, damage to maritime infrastructure would likely be a key part of the Russian effort. So that's something that is certainly not lost on people who plan for these types of things. But this GUGI that I mentioned, the Directorate for Deep Sea Research, it's part of the Russian Navy, they're capable of targeting subsea fiber optic cables, and those cables are crucial to the economic and digital services in the Baltic Sea region and in Europe. And as most people know, Estonia is known for being a digital country, e-Estonia and everything. So I think a lot more attention is being paid to this after the Balticconnector incidents that you raised. It's become more and more important.
Now, what is the likelihood that cooperation, say, with other states, you go next door to Latvia and Lithuania, or even across the pond to Sweden, that more states will join in this maybe a more common effort to monitor and protect the underwater infrastructure?
I think the likelihood is very, very high for a couple of reasons. One was the reason that I pointed out earlier in the segment, is that regional intergovernmental organizations have really been a place to facilitate dialogue on the most pressing issues in the region for a couple of decades now. And two, everybody has the common goal. NATO has become enlarged in that region. Some people say it may not be the best thing to do to call the Baltic Sea a NATO lake because there's the exclave of Kaliningrad there. Some people say that it is. I don't want to pick a side of that coin right now, but Poland, Germany, the Nordic countries in the Baltic, the 3 Baltic states on NATO's eastern flank, all have the same objectives. And I think that with Finland joining the alliance and with this kind of threat perception shift, where a lot of NATO members west of the eastern flank are starting to look at this and say, well, these countries have had a point all along, I think that that's going to facilitate a lot more attention and cooperation amongst the Nordic Baltic countries in this region.
Now, concerning and you just kind of touched upon this, though, but concerning the infrastructure that we do share that is underwater, how critical is it for the countries of NATO in the Baltic Sea region?
Well, the region is very vulnerable to attacks against critical infrastructure, and that could disrupt energy resiliency, for example. So that was one of the reasons that the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosions were deemed deliberate. But that could also potentially thwart thinking about how countries in the region carry out the energy transition in the long term. And that's something that Russia would have an interest in. I don't think that they will be able to succeed. I think that there's too much attention and too much brain power. I think that we outsmart them every step of the way, but that doesn't mean that they're going to stop trying. And as well, disrupting services. Russia right now at this very moment is not in position to take on NATO in a kinetic sense. You're starting to hear a lot about reconstitution, but that will take a couple of years. So right now in the immediate term, I think one of the things that the Russian Federation is trying to do is disrupt the cohesion of the alliance and also make citizens in allied countries afraid and also make them worried that their governments are not able to protect them. And so I think that those are some of the key purposes and strategic outcomes of these hybrid attacks.
Yep. Well, meanwhile, we have the elections across the Atlantic in the United States. They're definitely going to have a big impact on the situation that we have here in our region. Wierenga, Lecturer of International Relations at the Baltic Defense College, thank you very much for joining us, and appreciate having you on today.
My pleasure. Have a nice weekend.
All right, you too. And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thank you all for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.